Good afternoon. This is Business Live with me, Paul Kelso. After a year-long battle that saw debates in Parliament and a change in the law to prevent an Emirati takeover, the Spectator has finally been sold to GB News' biggest shareholder, Sir Paul Marshall. The £100 million sale adds the 196-year-old title to the hedge fund tycoon's growing media empire and leaves him still in the running to buy the Telegraph Group. I asked the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson, why he thought his new boss had bought the magazine.
Because it's the greatest magazine in the world. I mean, that's quite simple. He sees growth in The Spectator. You don't pay £100 million for a magazine with barely 3 dozen journalists if you don't think it can seriously grow in the future. And given that it was valued at £20 million when I became editor, we're talking a 5 times valuation increase, which is rare in this industry. But then again, there aren't any other current affairs magazines who've more than doubled their circulation in a market down by 2/3. So I think this is a business investment from somebody who sees a brand that's already created wonders, miracles, and wants it to do even further.
The magazine recorded a profit of a little over £4 million. So the £100 million valuation looks quite generous. Is he not also buying influence, particularly on the right of centre of British politics, which is what the Spectator and his other reported target, the Telegraph, give him?
Well, let's remember there were 22 companies in the auction process for The Spectator, a lot of them all wanting it for the same thing, because you will not find another publication that's done so well in these market circumstances. So yes, Sir Paul Marshall is somebody who's interested in politics, but there were lots of people willing to pay just as much as him, not quite as much as him as it turned out, but almost as much. But the influence thing is overstated, because the proprietor doesn't really influence the editorial direction of The Spectator. That's been the case for 40 or 50 years. The editor reports to a chairman. The chairman is of somebody who embodies the promise of editorial independence. And in my 15 years under the Barclay brothers, they were our proprietors before, they had about a dozen conversations with me and never once even suggested an editorial line they'd like us to take, because they were businessmen who wanted The Spectator to grow as a business and have this relationship with the readers. We don't need a bailout, by the way. We don't need a rich man to give us money. We have all of our costs covered by the money our readers give us, to whom we are exclusively dedicated.
That chairman who's been in that role, Andrew Neil, has stepped down. He previously said he was going to do that, but he's left with a parting shot. Says he doesn't believe there are any assurances of editorial independence that you talk about there. Have you had direct assurances from Sir Paul Marshall that you will be free to do your job?
Look, the deal happened quite quickly towards the end, and we haven't had time to talk about the structure which is going ahead. But Sir Paul has said he completely believes in The Spectator's principles and values and his editorial independence. That is, of course, what he's investing in. And again, you don't spend £100 million on something if you're going to completely change what made it successful in the first place. So in the fullness of time, we'll have a successor to Andrew Neil as chairman, and I imagine we'll be continuing the structure which made The Spectator successful in the first place.
If you've not had those assurances, I suppose you have to go on what you see from the way he's run his other big media holding, GB News, which certainly right of centre, employs a host of Tory and Reform MPs. There's been the odd Labour MP in there, multiple Ofcom complaints into alleged breaches of the code. It's indulged the odd interview with the odd conspiracist. Are you comfortable reporting to a man who appears to like that kind of media?
Well, first off, the editor wouldn't report to the proprietor. It doesn't work that way. It reports to the chairman, who is yet to be decided. But secondly, Sir Paul doesn't interfere in GB News. You can ask around there, and you will not find him picking up the phone, telling the presenters what to say or giving his opinion here or there. This is a guy who's a financier. He's got a lot to do with handling Marshall Wace, his company. So he isn't going to be so you could take GB News as an example of where he hasn't interfered. And the more comparable editorial projects which he invests in is Unheard. That's a website which is doing very well, and it doesn't have any of the attributes you discussed with GB News. These are different publications, different characters with different readerships, and anybody who's serious about the business of publishing knows that the most successful thing you can do is to leave his publications alone, to continue that relationship with the readers, because it's the only relationship that matters.
You have Unheard, a newish online publication, Spectator, very venerable periodical, and a television station. It does look like he is building a media empire that will sit certainly to the right of centre. There'll be arguments about how far right. And it looks like you will be part of that with the influence that comes with it. That's why rich men get into media ownership, is it not?
Well, the Barclay brothers were rich men who got into media ownership. They valued the Spectator at 20 million. They've just sold it for 100. That's what investors do. They take good companies, they put investment in it, and they want it to grow. Now, there's absolutely no reason why the Spectator shouldn't be worth £150 million in a few years' time with the right investment. That's what, but you need to have passion, you need to have a belief in what you're investing in. That's what I think makes Sir Paul different, because he can certainly see in the Spectator, he's very aware of the political news debate. He can also see the way that the Spectator has completely transcended the idea of a political magazine. We do politics very well, but it's a small portion of what we report on. So he will be wanting to oversee a success as profound as those that the Barclay brothers oversaw. They were billionaires, but they used their business nous to give us independence, to let us behave like a startup, which is what we've done here in 22 Old Queen Street. So that is the model I imagine Sir Paul will want to follow.
Yeah, they also put you up as the magazine as collateral in lendings that, of course, caused this, what's now the breakup of that empire. The Telegraph's still in play. You write a Telegraph there. Do you think Sir Paul wants the Telegraph too?
Well, he's rumoured to be in the bidding for it, but I'm not privy to that process. We're told it will happen at the end of the next month. So we'll have to see. I mean, I can't really speak to conversations I haven't been involved in, I'm afraid.
That was Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator, who has a new boss. Planning regulation is slowing down the rollout of faster internet, according to the chief executive of EE. Mark Alera told Business Live earlier that planning rules were the key barrier to implementing 5G mobile networks. The Labour government has made planning reform one of its priorities and a core part, it says, of its plan to grow the economy.
One of the key barriers to us rolling out infrastructure, whether it's fibre to customers' homes or apartments, or indeed 5G, are the planning rules that are still very arcane and really aren't favourable to rolling out digital infrastructure at the pace that the UK needs it. Infrastructure for any economy is a really, really important foundation, and digital infrastructure, of course, for the future economy is going to be incredibly important. So we're working really hard as an industry and having a very open dialogue with the regulator and government about how we can change some of these planning rules that quite simply just make it very, very hard for us to roll out at pace and scale that our customers want, but the planning rules and regulations just get in the way.
Now, the state pension is due to rise by 4% next April, giving an extra £460 a year to recipients. It follows today's job figures, which show that average weekly earnings rose by 4% in the 3 months to July, the measure used in the triple lock. Now, it comes as the government is under increasing pressure over the scrapping of the winter fuel allowance for many pensioners. Joining me now is Alex Clegg, an economist at the Resolution Foundation. Hi, Alex. We've seen the vote in Parliament this afternoon, never in doubt, confirming that the winter fuel pay cut will come. Labour have clearly made a political calculation. Could you talk us through the calculations and the numbers around what pensioners will win as a result of these jobs numbers and what they face to lose because of Labour's cut?
Yeah, so pensioners, as you said, their incomes benefit from the triple lock, which means that in line with average earnings, which have remained quite high this year, the state pension is set to rise by around £460 next April. Of course, that doesn't help things this winter. And one of the things that the government is planning to do is to remove the winter fuel payment from everyone who's not receiving pension credit or a similar means-tested benefit. So that means around 10 million pensioners will lose on up to around £300 this winter from that.
And that's a lot of money. We live in a country where what could seem a small amount of money to some people makes a huge difference. This increase in the pension, it would appear, the argument coming from the government is that it more than makes up for it, because these rises, I think we had a £900 increase in the pension last year. They are larger than has been the norm. Is that not the case?
Yes, that's true. And I think there's really two sides to look into here in this argument. The first being that things have changed a lot since this winter fuel payment was first introduced. It came in 1997 with the new Labour government, in a time when 3 in 10 pensioners were in poverty, the state pension wasn't really an adequate safety net to cover people's incomes, there was a real risk of a very large number of people not being able to afford their fuel bills. Since then, the annual real value of the state pension has risen by £2,600, largely because of this triple lock, and pensioner poverty has nearly halved as a result. The second side of the argument is that there's still a large number of very poor pensioners. Around 1.3 million pensioner families are living in poverty who will lose the winter fuel payment, and a lot of them are set to struggle quite a lot this winter. So there's a very large number of pensioners who can probably afford to lose £300, and there's a smaller group who might not be able to. And it's that smaller group that are actually quite hard to target with policy, because they're not visible in the benefit system if they're not claiming anything, and they might be eligible, but a lot of pensioners don't know that and they don't claim. Energy companies don't know people's incomes, you could argue rightly. So it's actually quite hard to get at that small group, which is why the payment has been universal up to this point.
You mentioned the pensioners there who perhaps don't need it, and Sir Mick Jagger and Sir Paul McCartney get dragged into this as the most extreme example. Can you give us an idea, though, how wealthy pensioners are as a cohort, notwithstanding the very rich and the very poor? It's quite a wealthy demographic comparable to others in society, is it not?
Yeah, and they have actually improved. Pensioner incomes have risen much faster than incomes for all other age groups. If you go back to around the mid-90s, pensioner incomes have more than doubled. The median pensioner income has more than doubled, whereas for all other age groups, it's about half that. And pensioners are now much less likely to be in poverty than working age adults or children as well. So as a whole, the group is doing, has done a lot better. It is largely to do with the triple lock. But as I said, there is still this smaller group where there's a concern.
Yeah, the Chancellor has made this cut. She says to address in-year overspends, the black hole about which we've heard so much. It's £1.5 billion perhaps is being saved. To address the triple lock would take a great deal more. That would cost an enormous amount more money, would it not? Because there is a question here that if the triple lock continues, it perhaps becomes unsustainable over the course of a decade or more.
Yes, and the triple lock is obviously an expensive policy in terms of public spending, and the way it works is that it will automatically ratchet up the value of pensions over time compared to earnings and prices. And one would think that there would be a natural point where that would get to a point that would be so much higher than earnings, for instance, that it might not be sustainable anymore.
Alex Clegg, thank you. That is a discussion that will continue, but perhaps a political argument for another day.
Thank you.
Some other stories now. Apple has lost its fight against an order by EU competition regulators to pay €13 billion in back taxes to Ireland. The European Commission said the tech giant had benefited from 2 Irish tax rulings for over 2 decades that artificially reduced its tax burden. It comes as Apple launched the iPhone 16 last night, which is capable of running Apple Intelligence, the company's new AI. A €2.4 billion fine has been imposed on Google for abusing its dominant market position, and that's been upheld by the European Court of Justice. The fine is the result of an antitrust investigation by the European Commission, which concluded in 2017. And UK grocery inflation edged slightly lower in the 4 weeks to the 1st of September, following a rise last month. The market researcher Kantar said it fell from 1.8% to 1.7%. And you've had a look at it once already. There it is. Sony has surprised gamers this afternoon with the first glimpse of the new PlayStation 5 Pro console. I'm not sure if this is the old one or the new one. This is Sony Interactive Entertainment's first new model in 4 years, the first under the leadership of its new chief executive. Sony announced the console would launch on the 7th of November with faster graphics card as well as AI upscaling. A quick look at the markets now and how they fared this afternoon. European stocks have slipped after some early gains. You can see they're red across the board as investors appeared cautious ahead of the European Central Bank's policy meeting on Thursday. Here, the FTSE 100, let's have a look. It's finished down a little, 0.78%. The biggest drag there was the drugs giant AstraZeneca, following mixed results in a lung cancer drug trial. And how about Wall Street? Let's have a look at the Nasdaq, in positive territory, up 0.5%. Currencies? The pound in negative territory against the dollar, up a little against the euro, and the euro down again against the dollar. Interesting moves in the oil prices, however. The Brent futures price has dropped over 3% today, falling below $70 a barrel after OPEC cut its demand forecast for the second time in 2 months due to weaker demand in China. Now, that's it from me. I'm back again with Business Live on Thursday morning. Coming up next, it's Mark Austin with the News Hour. He'll have all the build-up to this afternoon's vote as the 5 contenders to become the new Conservative leader, there they are whittled down to 4.